Hey guys, what's up? It's Booksy, and I'm giving you a very, very late. It's almost December 20th. It's 11:38 where I am. Um, so it's going to be an update for Monday, December 20th. And I didn't post on Friday. I was just tired and kind of had other things to do, and worked on a animation project this weekend and didn't get it done in time, and just kind of a mess. So I was just really late getting to this, and going into the holidays, I'm trying to spend more time with my family, so it's just been kind of hard to make time, I guess, to do this. It's not that I don't think it's important. I think it's important. It's just that I value my family time and my other job. So I'm trying to balance those things. All right. So first of all, I just want to talk about what happened on Friday, and for some context, there's been a couple people who said something along the lines of "I led people astray," which is sort of odd to me. You I did a measured move based on Fibonacci to a 618 value down here, and I said 2250, which was kind of the same as the low from December 15th. And of all of the people that are calling plays and talking about the stock, I was definitely on the bullish side compared to most. There was no question about that. I mean, I'm saying like 90% of the people that I follow we're talking about a drop down to 20 and then even 19. And I was out there saying on Thursday or whatever it was that I just did not see that happening. I saw it as a terminal spring. I figured that we would probably at most come down to 2250. I talked about this support region right here and how it was only penetrable after hours in pre-market. And in the morning, I posted on a tweet. I said, "Look, the volume to push this thing down was twice the volume it spent over here to push it down. So this was a 5% move right here, and it was like 50,000 or something. This was a 4.5% move, and it was 110,000. So that means that buying is stepping in. It's pushing back, it's absorbing it. And it was really clear it was going to turn sooner than later in the day. And people were kind of flipping out at first because, again, a lot of people were calling for this extreme downside. And first of all, I don't like this is one of the reasons why I really dislike price targets, because people lose their mind if you're right and they lose their mind if you're wrong. And that's not fair to me. Like, I'm just a normal human being. And for you to put me on that kind of a pedestal, good or bad, is really, well, it's unprofessional, but it's also just really destructive. It's bad for you, it's bad for me, it's not a good thing. You should not be making financial decisions based on what one guy says or what a few people say. You should look at the facts and decide for yourself what you think is the most likely scenario. You make that decision, you alone. I cannot give financial advice. But that being said, I mean, I wasn't like super far off. I called for a terminal spring and then a move up. And we had been talking about these T tests for like 2 weeks, and we've been talking about how we found, I mean, one of my videos is named the T tests or the test tests, which is like a joke. So I don't know how someone could take what I said and think that I was calling for like serious downside. I was definitely not calling for serious downside. A 618 drop, that's nothing. Okay. That's nothing. That's a normal retracement. That's a healthy retracement. And then I was calling for a move up. So again, I'm not trying to like be defensive. I don't understand, I don't understand either thing, right? The praise or the grief. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's your decisions. You make those decisions. You live with those decisions. Anyways, I'm really glad that a lot of people did make money on this play. There were folks that heard what I was saying, heard, on Twitter when we were talking during the day, and people were making money, and that's great. I really hope you use that to bless your family and those people around you, and your loved ones, and certainly in the holiday, it's a good feeling. All right. So what happened on Friday was a terminal spring. Okay, we talked about how the algorithm has changed and it now includes the spring action, all right, at the bottom of every single T1, T2, T3. It no longer goes T1, T2, T3 breakout. It goes T1, T2, T3 spring breakout. Okay, that was what we talked about in the last video. Upon further investigation, I found that this spring is actually always there. And I will tell you why. Okay. If you look at the shape of this fractal, you will see that, and things are going to get kind of crazy today. So hopefully you can do your best to keep up. But you see this shape, right? Okay. It sort of looks like a W. I know it looks like an M here, but just kind of ignore that. Let's look at regular hours here. You see this shape? You see this kind of V shape in the middle? So you've got kind of this like W shape, right? Like up, down, up, down. All right, that is the terminal spring. That's the terminal spring pattern. You see this pattern in a lot of other places. We saw it on the micro on Friday and Thursday. You also see it if you go back to January, or not January, I'm sorry, the June move, right? You see it very, very clearly right here. Up, down, up, down. You see that? Where does this occur? This actually occurs at the end of a T1, a T2, and a T3. Okay. The volcano, the mountain and the little mountain, and then the cup and handle. So this fractal, this terminal spring fractal, it's been here the whole time. It's just very hard to interpret it, right, until you know what it's supposed to be. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I see it. It's there all over the place. Sometimes it's drawn out. In this case, it was only a couple days, right? Sometimes it's not drawn out at all. You get a little dip and that's it, okay? And this is the dip on basically the dip on the cup, or the handle part of the cup. The dip on the handle part of the cup is essentially this same fractal. So with that being said, grain of salt, right? We don't always see it. It's not always super clear what it is. And sometimes in the fractal, it's like a blip, okay? Sometimes it's just like a really quick one-off blip. And then sometimes it's huge, like this gigantic macro one, which is really easy to see. And this is the first time we've got to see a macro spring play out on this stock. So it makes sense that, it's just something that I never really, it's not that I never saw it. It's just, I don't know if, you know what I mean? Like it's not something that you would pick up on, or I just hadn't picked up on it, I guess, that was part of other fractals. And now I see it like everywhere, now that I've watched it play out on a larger scale. So this right here, this is it. This is the terminal spring. So that fractal's in here. It didn't happen very fast, or it happened really fast, right? So let's go see if we can find our little W. Oh, look, there it is. Up, down, boop, reverse. Yeah, it's there. What about over here? Did we see it? Well, kind of at the end of the day. It's hard to say. So this part right here, up, down, maybe? But the thing is this bit at the end, I'm not so convinced that it's over. So this definitely plays into two springs at the same time. I charted this on the day of, right? This was at the top of the range here. I knew that we weren't going to break 30 more than likely because there's a trigger here. They didn't use it, but there's a T3 trigger here. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, basically this is a fractal that didn't complete. So it left an open end here. And once they allow it to complete, the code finishes. We're talking about a quantum computer algorithm. Okay, that's what BlackRock has. It's a quantum computer, which is bizarre. It's probably an AI, right? But this right here, this is the main region where the R1 will occur. The R1 is the run number 1, And this has a huge sections. This is the one we watched play out over a week ago. This is a huge section of iterating fractals that never finished. If you guys remember that really weird rainbow chart I made with the with the Fibonacci's, this is the region right here. Okay. And if you're brand spanking and you're like, I don't know what this guy's talking about, the R1, I believe, is where we are on the macro, like from June to now. And it represents a time where you experience a very sharp liquidity test, such as right here. Right? You see the massive amount of volume. And it's set up by these incomplete fractals on the other side. So you dip down into an accumulation for a time, right? And when you break back up, okay, it triggers these fractals that were set up over here that were segmented. And the proof is in the pudding. You can study the fractals and see for yourself, all right? Somebody critiqued me for saying fractals too much. I think that's really funny because I can't say another word. Like, what am I supposed to say? Doohickeys, thingamabobs. So if you look at this thingamabob over here and compare it to this red thingamabob over here, then this doohickey will correlate to this thingamabob. Like, I don't know what you want me to say. Like, there's no other word. Yeah, so this is the same section that we were just in on the terminal spring. And this looks like a head and shoulder. I call it the head and shoulder. But right here, you get these like double hooks. That's where the fractal sets up these segmented triggers. And then they go off when they start hitting them on those price targets, right? So it doesn't allow it to come back into that range until it's ready. So you do all this accumulation stuff down here. And then the major accumulation happens here on the run up. Right? And I believe this is kind of where we are on the macro, all right, in this stage. And then we're going to get another breakout, an SOS, and another breakout. So let's talk about this chart for a minute. And by the way, I understand that people call for things like 200 and, you know, that it's going to go to the moon or whatever in a minute. I do not think that's going to happen because I do not think that's the way the stock moves, and it's not the way the stock is traded. I think the way the stock is traded is clearly represented in the fractals. It just is. And the motivation for the R1 is to reaccumulate, okay, this fractal right here after a big run, all right, so that you can make another push. But you can see that where it eventually goes is a terminal point. Okay. And it doesn't just go straight up. Now, that being said, does that mean that there will be no MOAS or there will be no larger markup? Well, no, it does not, because it is true that this stock has a trading pattern, but there is a way that, like there always is a way, right, that this stock could push way further than what could be anticipated. I just don't believe in measuring the unmeasurable, and it doesn't make sense to do so and try to give people like these really high numbers that don't always make sense. Some of the numbers that people put out there are fine. Like, I understand where they're coming from, and they are using technicals to get those numbers. But anyways, I digress. So what do we have on the docket for perhaps Monday, Tuesday? Well, I actually thought we were going to be in a reaccumulation, and we did. This is the R1 fractal. It happened, but it actually played out more like this, okay? Which is basically like a large inverted J pattern. Once it finds its support, I think you're going to see something similar to this fractal right here, okay, like we saw in January and in June. But it'll play out probably on a smaller time frame. Could take a day, could take 5 minutes. I don't know. I don't know how fast it's going to go. I just know that once it hits that level, it's going to move. If you look at just purely the speed lines here, especially from this point across, you see that we kind of respected that as well as this trigger level, which makes sense. We were just studying that R1, remember that drop, right? And when it exits that trading range, what happens? Boom, right? So that's correct. That makes sense. It would hit this trigger, break out of this zone, right? This is the accumulation it was in. We were just looking at it on the other time frame. It would push through. The head and shoulders gives you those segmented fractals. R1 will happen. It's going to push hard, probably well beyond this point. Now, what happens after the R1 is a reaccumulation. So the question is, how far do you think the R1 can go? Now, there are specific setups in this stock, all right, that have only happened every now and then. One of those setups, I know you're going to be looking at this like, this is weird. I'm messing around with some other stuff, but you can just bear with me. One of those setups was here, where the particular way that this happens, so this is where we are, right, in the fractal, about to just do our little drop and then reaccumulation. Doesn't have to be this big, all right? Doesn't have to retrace to the same place. This is not a time frame, all right? People keep confusing it, saying that, oh, I think we're in January, I think we're in June. No. I think we're right where we are, December 20th. I think we're in the R1 fractal, which looks like this region of a bigger schematic, okay? So we're kind of like halfway up, if you want to put it that way. All right, maybe more, but maybe less, but you have to wait and see, okay? But the point is that this region, something, was perfect. It's kind of like everything's perfectly aligned on the macro for this move to happen. So the reason why I'm not super convinced right this second that we're just going to shoot straight up and just sort of hit another all-time high all of a sudden is because unlike these regions made sense on the macro. On the macro, this is a t-test. Like this is the setup, right? And I know you're thinking, well, couldn't this be the R1? Because this looks like you drop into the trading range over here, right? And so when you break that trading range, aren't you, going to shoot up and get the R1? Well, look how it came back through it. And it sort of reset, right? It actually passed back through it. That never happens, ever, in the microfractal. Ever. Right? Not until long after you're done with the entire sequence, like after you get to distribution. So again, the reason it happened here is mainly because of this move, this like whiplash. But you can see that on this red line, it was respecting a very common looking uptrend. And it finished the fractal sequence. Okay, it finished it. And here we are again, right, talking about the t-test. But this is basically what I'm trying to say is like, I believe this was a T1, that this was actually going to be the setup for it, okay, for the move to break out of here. And it happened on a longer time frame. And that's why this appeared to us to be so rushed, because it was actually supposed to happen earlier. But it basically set back the clock. It finished the T2, this region, and then it moved into T3, and it broke out. We got our R1, right? And a lot of people said, well, this probably just finished this move. Okay, fine. But I don't believe that this was, even if you thought, oh, it's finishing this move, well, it would still make sense that this is the R1, which is the first run, the first major liquidity test, okay? So that being said, all right, these are both very different times in the stock. This would have been, a very unique moment in the stock for a lot of reasons, but the biggest one being that they did this terminal looking spring, okay, because reasons, right? It could have been just a major short attack, right? Like that was the first narrative that everybody had, was that it was just people trying to drive it into the ground. But if you look at it from a Wyckoff perspective, it definitely looks like a spring, okay? Like something that could have been potentially planned, right? And there's even a test, and then it goes forward. So it's possible that we're looking at these the same way, and even that this is actually a spring as well, or excuse me, this is actually a spring as well. It just happened like on a different. See how it dips below? both of these dip below this orange quite a bit. And in this case, we went way below. Right, we went 1, 2, 3. Okay. So it's possible that the reason that we came so low is simply that we needed to get the liquidity in there for a bigger move to kind of slingshot us up. And that's a good argument for maybe why we're moving higher. I believe there's merit to that argument for sure. However, I also think that in some regard, this move, it's not the same as the first two, because unlike a t-test, right, which is this region where you're climbing like, quite a bit. Let's just do a quick measurement. From the bottom to the top, you're climbing 30%. And then in the R1 alone, you're climbing 25%. Unlike those moves, the next moves that come in this sequence are much weaker, right? You can measure from here. This is like the bottom. It's 22%. You see how it's diminishing each time? So I think the expectation that we're going to somehow get like a move that eclipses this move, it has to come from a place of a bunch of different factors. We're talking about gamma, we're talking about shorts covering, we're talking about tons of calls and whatever running into the money. I mean, we're talking about like just like so many things, okay, that need to fall in line, because otherwise it's going to respect the fractal movement and it's going to look different than the first one did and the second one did. It's not the same move. Okay, if I look at volume, it definitely doesn't match June. This is the pump in June. This is the pump now. Now I know it's different. I know that maybe it's going to be easier to move the stock. A lot of the weak hands have been shaken out. I agree with that. If you look at January, it's a little closer to this very first move here, and it's weaker than this move here. Okay. All right. Back to fractals. So the next thing I want to talk about really quick, I know we're looking at this inverse head and shoulder, which a lot of other people see, by the way, and I agree. If this moves to, I'm going to have people like panicking on this one. I should hide this real quick. Now you're going to panic about what I'm talking about. It's not bad. It's just that I'm not ready to talk about this just yet. Okay. It's really not that bad. Shouldn't even said anything. Can't find it. Oh, crud. All right. Let me get rid of this for just a minute. Projections, okay. Let me just talk about the moves here. All right. Now at this point, you're probably wondering, Booksy, where did you get this curve from? Well, I will show you in a minute, okay, where I got this from. But this is kind of how I've been charting it recently, and I think that you'll find it's pretty compelling, okay? So again, this was that spring into the move. You can see that the speed lines were more or less directing us towards where we're going to hit, and that's very common, all right, moving into the R1. Now, if you look at this speed line, where is it directing us to? Okay, pretty much this level right here, which is a respecting of this particular line. So I believe that this R1, when we hit $31, when we hit this trigger zone, that is going to propel us up another 50% of the move. Okay. And that at that point, we're going to hit like $38 or $39. I think you're going to see your first major retracement. It could be pretty quick, but I think it's also possible that it could be kind of slow. There's a couple different curves here that it could respect. One of them is right here. There's another one that's sort of in here, and it's a little more steep. All right, again, I'm going to get to the curves in just a minute. The reason that I think this is more likely right now is because if you look, this is the shoulder, right? And this is the shoulder. And there have been some people that have tried to draw this very flat, but the fact is that when this thing sets up for a head and shoulder, inverse head and shoulder, it likes to do so at an angle. It doesn't typically do it flat. So one example of that would be right here. This was setting up for an inverse head and shoulder, does it at an angle, didn't fulfill this move right here, this macro move right here, and then this macro move right here. You can see it's there as well. Now I know this dip is ridiculous, but you can see it here. There's one right here. There's also one right here. Okay, it just got really out of hand. So when we look at this region, it makes sense that this move would look like this. You can also see it in the micro. If you just want some more evidence that that's probable, all right? It doesn't have to happen, but it's very probable. All right, this is the spring right here, and the move that it sets up is an inverse head and shoulder. That's on an angle. Here's the spring right here, and the move that it sets up is an inverse head and shoulder. This one's not as a very extreme angle, but yeah, it's still at an angle, okay? Because it's a directional change, right? So it's not coming all the way back down on this shoulder, for instance. And you notice here how there's a sort of double tap, but it doesn't actually come all the way down. We talked about that before. I think we kind of got that already. Okay, if you look at there's a couple different time frames that you kind of see this double, but this is it, right? You got this really deep spring, and then we come back, we test this region, then we move on, set up for our move. So I think the likelihood of it dropping on Monday is pretty high. I mean, it's probably likely going to happen. And if it were going to happen, there's two lines. One is this one, right, which is a retest of this trend here, this upper trend line here. Okay, it kind of abandoned it when it went down. But that's roughly 27.25. Okay, so that's one possibility. Another one is this level right here. This level, let me go to 3 minute real quick. Just zoom out a little more. Chart's getting a little busy. This is a speed line that comes off of these two touch points. We haven't actually tested it. We kind of went through it here, and I thought maybe that was a test, but I think it needs like a proper, I mean, this could be the cup and the handle, but it's really ugly. Let's take a look. Let's just check something out real quick. Yeah. All right. So you see how this extended over 50%? It's possible that the reason it did extend, we know this is like that weird banana shape. It's possible the reason it extended that far is because it's a dip, but typically on a cup handle, you don't get that handle being super long and extending below 50%. So my thought is that we haven't actually seen the little cup and handle yet for the T3, which is at this level. So it's more likely going to be something that comes down, and I think it might respect this one right here if it's going to match that, okay, which is actually not below $28, right? So it does its little accumulation here. Maybe midday, we start running or towards power hour, right? We get the breakout, everybody flips out, and then we move on Tuesday, or it just goes into close, like, and then on Tuesday we move up, okay? It doesn't really make a huge difference to me. I still see it as an up move. And even if it came down here, I think is closer to the 50% retrace, then on this move, okay, not from the bottom, but just on this particular part. I think from the bottom, your 50% is right here, I believe at like 25. But yeah, then we're going to move up. It forms the next shoulder. Okay, it matches the sine wave, and then it continues. So let's talk about these fractal waves that I'm drawing. If I can find them. All right, I'm gonna do some digging real quick. We're gonna talk about lots of screenshots. All right, so what I noticed on this stock is that, and I may have talked about this a little bit before, but that basically every one of these accumulation into changing into, excuse me, yeah, these accumulation regions changing into a run and then eventually distribution includes this sine wave where you start on top of it, you disrespect it, right? You go to a low, you bounce, you come back, you respect it. Once you break out, you always break out at the T3. And then what's interesting is that this doesn't actually ever come back to really obvious. If you measure from the bottom to the top of this move, this doesn't actually come back to the 618. It comes back to this curve. So it does kind of respect those levels, right? We know that this is an algorithm, so it's taking all these things into consideration, but it continues up after the curve. And this was the reason I postulated that I don't think we didn't need to come down to like 19 and fill the gap, or even 20, because I suspected that when it came down, it hit the curve, and that was the main reason that it didn't continue going down, right? And if you look at it from this point of view, this is the same. I traced it over the same parts of the fractal. Okay. I was really careful to make sure I did that. Right. But this could be the potential reason, and I'm going to argue that it is for now, that this is, it's riding this sine wave pattern. Okay. It stays above it, respects it, it disrespects it, it tests it again, breaks out on the T3. The R1 comes back to it, right? Reestablishes liquidity. It's like a momentum curve, right? And then it continues again. And oftentimes we see that during the R2, right, which is another SOS type fractal, the R2 will actually break above this yellow line sometimes. Okay, it'll accumulate, break below it, retest, and then continue. And that's the more typical pattern for this stock. Sometimes it comes to the top of the trading range. If it's a really strong move, it can come all the way up to like 72, for instance. It does the same thing. Barcodes maybe, comes back, does another test real quick. It looks like this spring. All right, and then it goes again. And I do believe that if we're not using these curves at this point, that we're probably not charting it like the same way that this quantum computer is, because it's riding these waves like perfectly. I mean, like perfectly. Okay. So that being said, when you're looking at you see how it did this here? It dipped below, it touched it, it came up. You see how it SOS's basically right at the top of this trading range? It doesn't allow it to run right away. And then once it hits the main curve, the purple curve, then it continues its run. All right. See that? So it dips below, it comes back above, dips below, comes back above. How would it get above in this case? Well, look at where this particular setup is. You see that? This is where the head and shoulder is. That's where the shoulder is right there. So how could it come above? Well, it could create the shoulder. Really simple. And then it breaks out. It's perfect. So it comes above and it goes to either 45, 52, or 60. Those are the current price targets that I have. 45 is a big one because of options. There's just a lot of interest in that region. And then we've got 52, another high. And then we've got $61 just getting smacked down all the time right there. 60.96 is the top of the trading range, the way that I drew it. And I believe that's still pretty accurate now. You can see it was respected very tightly, all right, multiple times when you draw it that way. But yeah, I think that we're going to break above that. And then however high we go, it doesn't really matter. but I think it's going to come back and retest this line again and then move forward. Okay, up, and away. I'm going to save some of that stuff for another video. It's like projection stuff. So you can see like that's the reason why I'm using this curve. Goes up it disrespects it. It comes back up, it retests it. Right? Once it breaks out, you get your R1. In this case, it makes the most sense for this to run to this line right here, come back down, re-respect the curve, the Bezier. And by the way, if you're wondering, and you probably are, okay, if you're wondering, hey, Booksy, this sounds like a bunch of conjecture. Let's just take a look. Let's test my work, okay? Oopsie. Let's test it out. Let's test it with fib levels and see what we get here. Let's do it from the very bottom to the top of this move. All right, where does that land us? Let's say it actually hits the very top. Well, I mean, we're in the golden pocket region right now. And then where could this hit? If it really wants that perfect intersect, you know the 382 on this stock is a very big favorite of reaccumulation, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So to me, this is not just, oh, it's just conjecture. This is the way this stock is being traded. It sets it up to make hit these levels perfectly. And what about that drop that I talked about right here, the 28? What would that give us? Oh, the 618. Okay. Yeah. So to me, this makes not only perfect sense, but it adds up on the fib levels like almost perfectly. To a very obscure number, sure, it's 39.23, right? But the fact of the matter is, and I think this is where I'm going with all this, is that I believe that the way this thing will be traded long term is also going to respect these rules. And we're going to see how that plays out. But right now, we've got some serious speed lines that are definitely telling me that that's the marker. So we have speed lines, we have fib levels, we have that are really clear. If you draw to this marker, you have the R1 set up right here. Okay, all it needs is that dip to complete the shoulder, and also to complete the T3 fractal. It needs the volume, of course, but this to me is like just perfect. I mean, it's perfect. It's a perfect setup for this. You might be asking, well, Booksy, what if it blows past this region? Does it have to come back? Well, I think the answer is no. You know, if you look at the way this thing plays out, is that again, there's these like momentum curves, right? And when you see how it plays out, you can always find the correct momentum curve after the fact. I'm trying to go ahead and chart based on what I know this stock does, how it moves, how it sets up for moves. We've been talking about this for like the last month, it feels like, about these iterative fractals and these, you know, and now it creates these spikes, right, that propel you past certain points. Okay. We've been talking about this for so long, and it's like it's all starting to click now, right? And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get ahead of it, and anticipate the way that I think it's going to move based on just the patterns. That's all TA is, right? And I could be wrong for sure. Nobody's perfect, and you always end up making a mistake at some point. Oh man, look at that. Look at that speed line. Yep. But I'm fairly convinced at this point that it's not going to just drop down. And if it did, it may come to like the bottom here, the 786, that's 24. But it's going to have to get through quite a bit to get there. I could see it dipping below the 618, right? From top to bottom here. In terms of this move, let's check that out. Volume is king, you know. So right now we're at that 236. It likes the 382. Where's the 382 at? The 382. Oh, look at that. It's the same. It's the same as the oh, I drew it a little off. There we go. The same as that shoulder line, isn't it? $28. Likes the 382 for reaccumulation. I'm telling you, it is one of the major stopping points. It also likes the 618, and the 618 in this case is $26 here. So I mean, again, if it broke, there's a few places it could catch. I'm not going to say that it can't break, but I am saying that it's just very convenient that if you measure these two moves, let's try this one. Yeah, this one doesn't really line up with anything, right? But if you measure from the bottom of the move, yep, it certainly does. So yeah, I think the next couple of days, this is what we're looking at. I think long term, we're going to have to talk about the larger S curve, okay, along with that yellow curve that I drew, and talk about how the R2, which is a breakout basically of the R1, how that plays into all this. Anyways, that's all I got for right now. I hope it wasn't too scrambled. It is actually Monday, December 20th now. So we will see you later today.